Hi everyone, so this is a quick look at the respiratory system. So the respiratory system is quite complicated. It's an organ system, which means it's made up of groups of organs, organs made up of groups of tissues, tissues are made up of groups of cells. So the respiratory system is how we get oxygen into our body, and it's also how we remove things like CO2. You've just got to be aware of the respiratory system and these gases. The air that goes in is made of lots of different gases, so it's not just oxygen. You have got a small amount of carbon dioxide as well as the other gases that are in the air. There's also obviously the air that comes out. Again, it's made up of different gases. It's not just CO2 that's coming out. The air that comes in, because we need quite a lot of oxygen that's going to go in, is going to be higher in oxygen and lower in CO2. The air that comes out, there isn't actually that much CO2 in the air or the air that comes out, but proportionately it will be higher. So there'll be more CO2 than what went in being exhaled because of respiration, and there will be there'll be less oxygen coming out. That doesn't mean that there is overall more carbon dioxide than oxygen. That's just proportionate to what was going in the first place. So we're going to have a look at the respiratory system. When you inhale, that means that the air comes in. When you exhale, that means the air comes out. And you can do that in two ways. So it can either go through the nasal cavity or it can enter through the mouth, but they both find their way down the trachea. So that's that bit here. The trachea is made up of rings of muscles. So you can see here, it's also very thick cartilage, so it keeps the airways nice and open. It is lined with cilia, so those little cells that look like this, and that is to move across or move along any mucus. It doesn't trap mucus, it just moves it along. So if you have a phlegmy cough, it will push it out. It will move it along with these little specialised hairs that you have got up here. So they're a specialised cell that you find in this area. You also do find them in places in the reproductive system, like the ovary, because they help move along eggs. Now, as you go down the trachea, which is this branch here, the trachea then branches off. So you have the bronchus or the bronchi. So bronchus is sort of plural, bronchi just means one. So it branches off, you have bronchi. Now this branches off again into these smaller branches that you can see. So it goes from trachea to the bronchus or bronchi, and then it goes into these smaller sort of tubes, and these are the bronchioles. So I'm trying to colour them in here. So these are sort of the little branches that you can see. Now the bronchioles are important because again, it's trying to get that oxygen which is in that air. It's trying to get into the area that it wants. They're very small tubes, and when we go to actually dissect it, you'll see these tubes that are on here. So these are the bronchioles, these small tube-like structure. Now, at the ends of all of these, you should be able to see, I'll try and do it in a different colour, these little structures here. Now, these little air sacs, you would have learnt about them in year 8, I think. These little air sacs are the alveoli. So the alveoli are very important. That's where your gas exchange happens. So the air sacs, we can say, are the alveoli, and we'll look at those separately next lesson probably. So this air is coming in, containing lots of different gases. The one that we want is the oxygen. It's finding its way down through into the mouth, through the trachea. It's inhaling, it's going into the bronchi. It sort of goes into these small structures, the bronchioles, and then it gets to the alveoli, and that is where the diffusion of these gases can take place. And we call that gas exchange. Now you need to know the pattern for when you inhale it in through the nasal cavity or the mouth, and the pattern that it takes, but also when you exhale. So when we go all the way backwards, you need to know how it would diffuse out. So when you exhale. So I'll try and rub this out quickly, and then we'll go through that. So when you exhale, it's the opposite that's going to happen. So you're going to get diffusion. You're going to try and remove any carbon dioxide that has built up. So the diffusion, it diffuses into the alveoli. I'll call that A. It goes back up the bronchioles, B, and then it makes its way to the bronchus, the branches, another B, back up the trachea, and then it goes out either through the mouth or it can exhale out through the nose. So you need to know it both ways. So that is a sort of overview quickly of the respiratory system. On the outside of them, just to make you aware, I'll do it in yellow, you have got these little bones. These are your ribs. So these ones that I'm trying to highlight here. And I will do in green these little areas between them. So you've got your ribs, but sort of over those you have what we call the intercostal muscles. Now, intercostal muscles are very important. If you ever feel like you have a stitch, it's typically the intercostal muscles. So that's not particularly great. Let's try and see if we can do it in this. So intercostal, so the inter part means in between, and the costal part, it means ribs. So just so you're aware, this part means between. So you've got your ribs for protection of your organs, you've got your intercostal muscles on the outside, and then at the bottom you have something that is quite important. I realise I spelled this wrong. It is AL, but we'll ignore that. We'll try intercostal. So at the bottom you have this thick muscle here, and this is your diaphragm. Your diaphragm is a very thick sheet of muscle. It is what allows what we call a change of pressure. So the muscle contracts, and that will draw in the air, inhale, and when it relaxes it will flatten, and that allows the air to exhale. Now, this change in pressure, but the movement of the diaphragm is what causes the air to move in and out. So it's a big pressure system. So you can imagine it's a bit like when you squeeze a bottle. When you squeeze it, you're increasing the pressure. There's less area for all those particles. It sort of feels quite hard on the outside of the bottle. And then when you stop squeezing the bottle, there's more area for all the air that's inside of it. So it's nice and relaxed. And we'll talk about that later on.